Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders. This is the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I am delighted to be joined by the superb Buta Atwal. Now, Buta is the Chief Executive for Wrightbus and Ryse Hydrogen. He's had extensive international experience as a JCB Senior Global Executive, managing everything from the operations of major JCB factories within the EU, North America, South Asia, and MENA as well. Buta is responsible for everything from the day-to-day operations of the business through to growing and building the organization up to the grand and global scale that it is at right now. Welcome to the show, Buta.
Thank you very much. A very grand opening, and I appreciate the introduction.
We deserve it. You deserve it, Buta. I guess on that note, obviously, I've had the very fortunate opportunity to really get to know you over, well, probably over the last year, I guess. But I wonder, for those of our listeners who perhaps don't know you as well as I do, I wonder whether you could give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour of how you came to be chief exec for some pretty well-known organizations.
No problem. I think the key thing is, luck is, I'll be honest with you, I went through college and I was lucky enough to meet a lecturer who said, "You're too clever not to go to university." And that's the first time I looked at you going to university. I went to university, did manufacturing engineering. And from there, I applied for one job, and that was with Unilever as a management trainee. I got that job. Why I applied for that job, I don't know. It was there and I applied for it. And then I was a management trainee with Unilever. And in my hometown at the time, Toyota was setting up a factory. So a year and a half into Unilever as a management trainee. In fact, my degree was based on Toyota. In manufacturing engineering, Toyota are synonymous. I applied to go to Toyota, got there, went into their lean programs, became a lean lecturer, really understood the subject, meandered into HR. And because of the training and development part of that, through that, joined JCB. And again, luck-wise, I was working with the future CEO and I was helping him with some of his problems. We got to know each other really well. And an opportunity came up in India and I got recommended for the India role, which was working in India and developing the Indian operation from a very rudimentary one into a more automated. And I went there as a general manager, developed it, and we turned it from 9-a-day vehicles to 50 odd and put plans in for a 100 vehicle a day program. And that operation now is JCB's largest volume and crown jewel with regards to volume and processes and techniques. Whilst I was in India, we were due to come back, my wife and I, my daughter, and there was another facility that required help. I was asked to go there, went as a general manager down to there and turned that around. It started off well, but needed help is the best way of saying it. And we righted that very quickly. And then when I came back to the UK, I was fortunate enough to work with a gentleman called Joe Bamford, who son of the owner. And we started a different journey where he was going up the organization and I ended up as his right-hand man, and we did more and more together. And then Joe decided to do things outside of the business, and I inherited and became an MD of that business, and I became an MD of another business, and we turned those businesses around to okay businesses to very profitable businesses. And it just continued in that vein. And then Joe was working outside and I was asked to work for him again. Another good opportunity, starting a gas business, a hydrogen gas business, renewables, future technology business. Really interesting. We went into that. And then as we were doing that, a partner was Wrightbus, because we were producing the gas for the bus, and they went into receivership. I was asked to look at that and see if we could bring it out of receivership. We did, and I was asked to run that as well. So none of that was planned. It was just a case of the next interesting challenge, and anything that's interesting I did, and I've ended up in this position where I am now.
Well, thanks so much for sharing, Buta. And I love the fact that you are incredibly modest and start off by saying this was luck. You make it sound relatively easy, but I'm sure that there was a lot of hard work that went into everything that you did. And as you were talking, I was thinking, oh, lean lecturer. That is a phrase that I don't hear every day, but I love it. So when it comes to kind of manufacturing, and I hear a lot of this at home because my other half, as you know, works for Jaguar Land Rover, is the whole, Lean Six Sigma manufacturing, all these kind of interesting terms when it comes to manufacturing and engineering environment. But going from this management trainee at Unilever, fast forward to where you are right now, I mean, it's a pretty impressive journey, because I know we had this joke about the office that you're in being a little 70s and you being a child of the 70s. Was this something that you intended to do when you were the young, up-and-coming kind of pre-graduate Buta? Were you thinking, hey, I want to be a chief exec for a large organization? Or was there anything in the family and the cultural background that you think led you to take this particular path?
Quite the opposite, actually, because my father would have wanted me either go to work at 16 and start a job, or start a business. So at the age of 16, I was offered the business to start up and run. So almost that was the route for people like me in those days. It wasn't becoming a CEO. The inspiration was the lecturer coming to me and saying, you should go to university. Then after that, my inspiration's always been trying to do things I've never done before, or try to do things I'm really interested in, or I feel passionate about. And because of that, I've never really planned my career. I've always planned, what do I want to do next with regards to interest or drive? But because I'm interested and driven in those things, it's got me to the next level. And the other thing I would always say is, when I got to those levels, I always looked around above me and thought, oh, I could do their job. Not because I was planning to do their jobs. It's just I thought, well, if that person's doing it, I believe I can do it. And then the next levels become available to me. It's just that constant looking forward. I always have a saying, I never think about yesterday, I always think about tomorrow. And you say I'm being modest. I don't think I am. I just don't look back on my career. It's not important. It's done. It's what's next is the important thing.
It's so interesting. And actually, it does resonate a lot in the sense that I know I don't often look back, I always look forward. But at the same time, the amount of kind of chief execs and CEOs that I speak to who kind of suddenly get to this, I don't know, bit of pinnacle in their career where they think, wow, actually, hang on, look how far I have come. Do you spend time ever reflecting? Because you mentioned something interesting there, and you said something like people like me were encouraged to go and start up our own business, but actually you ended up going to university. I find that quite interesting in terms of, the mindset, if that makes sense.
I think historically, people of colour, if they wanted to accelerate their position in society, they went into either very professional professions like legal, doctors, that type of stuff, or they started their own business because there's no barriers. And I'm not talking about just barriers with regards to colour. I'm just talking about financial barriers. My parents lent my relations money so they could start their business at no interest. So there was less barriers to start a business than it was to go into employment, if that makes sense. So it was easier for me to do those things probably than trying to map a career and to become a CEO. And I'll be honest with you, if you talked to me about being a CEO at 16, I wouldn't have known even what you were talking about.
I bet your parents are exceptionally proud of where you are, though, right now, having perhaps in the early days thought would be brilliant to go into running your own business as opposed to taking the route that you went down in the end?
Oh, it's all my father's idea.
So he takes the credit, right?
Of course, everything. No, in all seriousness, look, my father is my inspiration. He developed the work ethic that I think I work hard, but he makes me look lazy. He doesn't claim the credit. I give him the credit because my parents worked extremely hard and ensured that I never felt anything other than secure. And therefore, that's a great basis to make some career and life decisions.
That is so touching. And I mean, I feel the same about my parents. And I think I've told you before when we've had conversations outside of the podcast, I was adopted by white British parents, both, you know, working class, worked incredibly hard. My mum worked for the NHS and my dad did lots and lots of different jobs. But he always said, darling, as long as you try your absolute best, don't care really what it is that you do, because it is about trying your absolute best. And that is the key.
I mean, the thing I say to my daughter is, as long as you're always learning, I'm happy. So there was a rule as my daughter was growing up, any book she wanted to read, I would always pay for it. It never came out of her pocket money. My greatest belief is the more educated we are, the more we read, the more we understand, the easier life becomes.
Mm-hmm. No, it's absolutely fascinating. And like yourself, it is, you know, very much about what this podcast is about as well. It's about inspiring, educating, and motivating others to continue striving forward for better. And if you don't mind me picking up just on something you said earlier, which was, you know, that people of color, you know, like yourself, may take a certain tact. And I guess what I'm asking in a roundabout way is, you are a chief exec for a well-known organization and you are a man of color. Do you ever find yourself being approached or asked by others more these days about your background and where you came from, how you came to be where you are today because you're in your position that you're in? Or was it something that you were conscious of as you were growing throughout the career?
The answer is yes. I have a nephew who actually came to me and said, look, can you give me some career advice on an ongoing basis? Because there aren't many people like you that I can associate with. And that's the first time it really hit me that it was so rare. I was fortunate at JCB that when I was going through the ranks, there was a gentleman called Ankur Suna who ran India, but was from the UK, from Birmingham, and went over there. There's a guy called Arjun Murda who was working in the UK. So there were people, and it didn't seem like a barrier. But when my nephew asked me, I thought, oh, you know, how rare is this? And you realise there aren't a plethora of people out there that you can look at and say, okay, go through your experiences because they're similar to mine. But that can be a good thing and a bad thing. You build your own reputation that way. You build your own imagery. You know, you're not following other people's stereotypes of, you know, what should be. You're developing your own. So there's no bad news in my life. You know, there's only things that you make better. And I think that's one of the things I've told him, that the drive, the passion, the knowledge, and the understanding of your subject matter breaks any barrier, because at the end, talent works.
It's really interesting juxtaposition there that you mentioned, in the sense that on one hand, you haven't found it a barrier because you've absolutely just continued striving. And I know you say luck, but I think, you know, clearly there's been a lot of hard work along the way as well. And this whole kind of sense of building your own future and being in charge of your own destiny. I did some volunteering in schools actually for charity called Working Options. And I went through my career really aware of being incredibly different, up until the point that I had a light bulb moment one day at a round table I'd organised, and it was purely guys. However, hearing the youth and those leaders of the future, in essence, say things like, if I can't see it, I can't be it. Or your nephew, for example, saying, can you give me advice? Because there are not many people that look like yourself in the position that you are at. It does kind of make you think, well, not everyone is in a position to have that confidence to pave the way in the way that you have done or others have done. So I guess, what advice might you give to others that might be having some of these self-doubting moments? What would you say to them?
Something that I learned at Toyota is that let your data do your talking, because it gives you the confidence to really articulate your message and gives the drive and impact to that message as well. So if you're ever not confident of going into an environment where you don't feel accepted, be not the smartest, but the most data-driven person in that room, because therefore you'll be able to answer any questions. You will have details that other people won't, and therefore you will be listened to because you will just have the information. And then when you get more experience, you need less of that data because the rhythm of the messaging is with you, and you instinctively start doing the predictions of that data easier and quicker and smarter. But just start with data. It's so much easier to construct an argument when you know your facts, your figures, and your clarity.
That is, my husband would love that answer. That is brilliant. And so I think it does make a lot of sense. I think it gives you that confidence when you have the black and white down there on paper, rather. But you also mentioned the fact that obviously you had a great relationship with Joe Bamford, who was a brilliant entrepreneur, and some good relationships as you were getting up to where you are now in the career. What about those who might be great at data, good at articulating the case or the business case, but are less confident when it comes to having the gravitas that you clearly need in order to make it up to those more senior levels? And I'm sure you must be the same if you're at conferences or speaking to other executives, is the vast majority of the time, they do tend to have an innate capability to build relationships, or if not, be relatively commercial, if that makes sense.
But that, like everything, that's just practice and failing a few times and making a few social faux pas and that's just, that's just normal. What I would say is, we all have those worries that, am I going to fit? Am I wearing the right clothes? Have I got the right shoes on? Is my tie a Windsor or not? Or, it doesn't matter. All I'd say to people, it doesn't matter. What really matters is talent, because the most talented people get accepted quicker than the least talented people. And so if you're not talented at all and you've got no confidence, then do all that, because that gives you some structure around to build yourself up. But if you're talented, believe in your talent and just talk about the things that you're passionate about. And if you are passionate about them, they come across very, very well. Mm-hmm. And that's a technique that I would suggest to anyone, is when you go into a room, be confident of your subject matter and talk about it like you believe it. And if you do, it's easy to convince, it's easy to stand out, because there's fewer and fewer of those types of people. And there's fewer people who are prepared enough to take the responsibility for their words as well. And that's the biggest advice I'd give people, is don't shy away from your responsibilities, don't shy away from your knowledge, enjoy it, share it, and drive it where you can to prove you not just know it in theory, but you can deliver it as well.
It's superb advice. It makes me think of a quote that I once heard, which is, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And I wonder, because you mentioned belonging there, which is a subject that I could talk about forever and a day, but have you ever been in a situation where you felt that you hadn't belonged?
Every day, in every situation, because human beings are naturally insecure. We don't walk around secure. If you walk into a brand new room, you look at people who are close to you, so you then walk over and see if you can have a quick common bond. That's what you do naturally as human beings. Every day you should go into a room and scope it and understand it and try to predict who are the influencers, who are the movers, who are the shakers, and try to get your message out that covers the room. But first you do it because of trying to fit into the room, then it's a skill. Then you can use a skill. But I walk into every room almost I don't belong, because probably because I don't. but it's never stopped me.
That is absolutely brilliant. Then I often, and I think many people, I've yet to really meet an exec that doesn't have an element of imposter syndrome. But I said to someone the other day, I think it is what keeps us sharp, because the second you kind of feel, I know everything, I have nothing left to learn, well, it seems that it's game over, because we're constantly learning new information, and until the day we die almost, we will be learning. So not to get too lackadaisical or think that we know it all. Maybe that slight bit of insecurity is actually a good thing.
In a strange way, being insecure, not knowing everything and asking questions and taking interest in people engages other people into talking to you. And if you do that, you learn more. And you can cover a room better by saying, what do you do? Oh, that's interesting. How does that work? I mean, in effect, what you're doing today is exactly that. By showing interest in others, that breaks down the barriers of whatever barriers are in front of you. So good common sense goes a long, long way. So if you don't know anyone, ask questions, being interested in what they say type of way. And that, as I say, that normally gets you through an evening and meeting some good people and future friendships.
Curiosity, indeed. And I've got to just ask one more question, because I could sit and talk to you all day, Buta, but you're obviously very passionate about CSR and, with the hydrogen buses. I've seen a lot on the news. I find it fascinating. Actually, we're about to get an electric car soon. I wonder, are there any specific things that you have seen in the market when it comes to this movement for CSR, this movement for kind of green social purpose, and also in that diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, organizations and people really being more into doing things that matter for sustainability and our collective future?
One thing, when I speak to people, most people agree with, the environment needs to be improved or maintained if you're a skeptic, improved if you're not. And transport needs to change from petrol or fossil fuels to other methods. And one thing that I've realized, that battery electric and hydrogen are two very good methods of delivering change. The only difference is hydrogen is something that you can get a windmill or a wind power, generate electricity. That electricity generates hydrogen gas. You put that into a car. It's the cleanest way of doing transport that there is. Battery electric has some difficulty still, because we all know the mining that you need to do to produce a battery comes from probably Africa and child labor. At the end of its process, it probably has to go to landfill. So although there's a net benefit with battery electric, there's less of a benefit than hydrogen. This is something Joe's really inspired me, but the world should go to more hydrogen, in my opinion. If you look at the third world countries, or the developing countries, I should call them, mainly heat. So solar power to generate the hydrogen is there. You don't need oil. You can deliver hydrogen in these countries easier than digging for oil. So it's a real balancer in economies and delivering clean environments and clean transport into those environments. So I believe in either battery electric or hydrogen, but I believe if everybody invested in hydrogen, the world would get there quicker and simpler, and you'd see the technology improvement, but also the lifestyle change being not so significant. You and I now go to a petrol pump, put some petrol in, drive off. Well, that's the same with hydrogen. You wouldn't need to change that behavior at all. You don't need to plug in your car for 5 hours and hope it lasts, because you've always got a fueling station coming up. And that's where I think hydrogen probably will have the advantage. In 10 years' time, hopefully you'll be listening to this, re-listening to this podcast and say, actually, he did predict that. Hopefully.
I love it. Emerging trends. We're making a note of this specifically, that we should revisit this perhaps every year. You sold me on hydrogen. I mean, I think it's brilliant what you're doing. And I'm not just saying that. I do think we've got to think outside the box. Obviously, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, but CSR and what we are doing on a day-to-day basis, which, you know, those small changes actually can have huge fundamental impacts, not just for now, but for, you know, our kids, and, you know, future generations of leaders who will be living in this world. But I must ask just a couple of quick lightning round questions, Buta, before we wrap up. And I'm going to start with the most difficult one first, if that's cool with you. And that is, what would you say is your secret to success, or is there one?
I say always learn, always do something that makes you interested, and do things that you are really, really interested in. And that way, someone always said, if you're interested, it's never work. And genuinely, that's what I believe, that I always say I don't want to do a job I'm not interested in, because I've struggled doing it. So don't follow the money, follow your interest. And if you're really interested in it, money will come, you know. And so that's my biggest advice to anyone.
Love that. That is a great nugget of wisdom. And what about diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity? I know it means different things to different people, but what does that mean to you personally?
I always see my diversity, if you want to call it, as an advantage. What do I mean by that? If I walk into a room and give my name as Buta, no one forgets my name. You know, everyone knows who I am. So then all I have to do is add credibility to that name and give value to that person, and they will remember who said it. Whereas there may be 20 other Nigels and they will forget which Nigel it was. So I just say, believe in your advantages, not your disadvantages, and just drive those advantages as hard as you can.
Awesome. And no offense to any Nigels who are listening in as well. And finally,
I love you all, Nigel.
yeah, we love you, Nigel. And finally, I was going to ask you a question about inspiration, but I'm fairly sure that you may say your parents, because you mentioned it earlier on. But I gotta ask last, if you could go back in time and speak to the young Buta, not that you're not young now, but I mean the Buta before you got on the grad program.
No, young Buta's fine.
Yes, you're younger, much younger. Or indeed someone who's in a similar situation thinking, you know, culturally maybe looking at going down a certain path, I'm considering other things. What advice would you give to your much younger self or someone similar?
I would say, you know, if I went back to school, there were certain subjects that really interested me, but I didn't do because I thought they wouldn't lend me to a job or lead to a job. I would always say, you know, almost give the same advice to myself that I gave earlier, which is really be passionate about things you're passionate about. But the other thing that I haven't mentioned in here is travel as much as you can. Go around the world, do different things. I'm fortunate enough with Toyota have to go to Japan, and I stayed and kind of did some training in Japan, America, India. I stayed 4 years in India. I spent a good 2 years in kind of on and off in China. It's that travel that makes you understand not just cultures, but different ways of doing things, different ways of nuances of how to approach things. That just makes life a lot simpler and easier. So do things you're interested in and travel to find out what you're interested in.
Lisa, it's been an absolute joy having you on the show today. I feel I've learned a lot as well. And there's been some really interesting stories. I know that this is going to inspire many people. So thank you so much for being here.
It's nice actually talking like this, not just, you know, speak about yourself, but actually reminding yourself of what you've done, because genuinely anyone who looks back and say I've done all this, probably hasn't done a lot, to be honest with you. But sometimes it's nice chasing out that knowledge and hopefully passing it on to anybody. And, anybody wants to contact me, I'm sure there's some details on the podcast. More than happy to follow that up and give any support that I can to any individual.
That is so kind of you, Buta. And I always do a summary at the end, and I'm thinking, where do I start with a summary now? But I think, for me personally, the things that have really been, incredibly inspirational are kind of going from being a child of the 70s and not knowing what you want to do to really kind of following what has been a pretty epic path, taking you to lots of different international countries. But a lot of the things that have really stood out for me is the kind of the richness of the learning culturally, not being scared at all to put your head above the parapet and really push out to learn more, to drive that learning, regardless of whether you have that experience or you might be slightly different in the room, but that constant hunger to want to continue to learn, and also willingness to want to actually give back to those future generations. As you said, when we started off the conversation, which was brilliant, you said that you rarely look back, and now we're kind of actually only half an hour of conversation, and you think of all of the learnings, the nuggets of wisdom that have been imparted throughout the podcast. I love this hard work and almost kind of tenacious attitude. I think it is something that our future leaders and existing executives really need to consider, especially in the environment that we are living in right now. But I was thinking of this quote, and I think you may have even said it before, was, why fit in when you were born to stand out? We are human beings. Everyone is flesh and blood anyhow. And actually, the time that we have on this world is relatively short. And so whilst we may feel insecure, scope out, predict, consider the movers, the shakers, go head first into opportunities and do your best not to look back, but to reflect on the journey. And finally, I love the fact that you talked about kind of actually being different is a superpower. And I think anyone tuning in who is thinking, hey, I don't know if I belong, remember that having a different name, being different for which and whatever reason is a great thing. So when you become unforgettable, then, as Buta says, add credibility and add value and do something that you are passionate about.
There's one final thing I want to say, because people look at these things, and I've done it, and think it's easy for them, but I'm scared to do it. One thing that's coming through in all of this when you're talking is I'm scared every day, but when I'm scared, I'm learning. So don't be afraid to be afraid. It's just normal. But if you're afraid, you're trying to bridge that learning gap. And that's the thing that you aim for. Don't be secure, be afraid, because you are learning. And if it just feels like, oh, yeah, but, that he's a confident guy. Confidence comes from learning how to be scared and not showing it, because we're all scared.
I adore that. It is that vulnerability piece, because you're absolutely right. We kind of put on pedestals executives and, others who might be in the spotlight and think it must be easy for them. But absolutely, it's, everyone has to get there somehow. Buta, thank you ever so much. And I will put all of your details into the show notes from the end of today's show. My name is Leila Mackenzie-Dellis, founder and CEO of Dial Global. You've been listening to the superb Buta Atwal, today Chief Executive for Wrightbus and Ryse Hydrogen. If you missed anything, don't worry at all, because you can catch up on demand. You can also download the podcast or the video version. You can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast apps. You can also download the Dial Global app in the App Store, Dial Global Network. And you can visit us at www.dialglobal.org/podcast, where we will put all of the annotations and the show notes in there for you. But until next time, take care and look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms: Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.